You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. It's good to be live with you guys again. I know it's been a little bit. Now, don't worry. I know right now you're only seeing me on here, but Daryl is going to be joining me momentarily. This is going to be a show where both of us are going to be participating. So he just needs a little bit of time to get his stuff going. So I'm just going to carry it for a little bit. And of course, maybe chat with some of you guys as well. So tonight we actually have a really cool show. So like I said, it's been a minute, right? It's been a while since we've been on live. I think the last time we were live on Monday was 2 weeks ago. So we've missed you guys. And it's always good to be on live with you guys. But tonight, what we're actually going to be talking about is Thrawn's Empire. Now, of course, Ahsoka saw the return of Grand Admiral Thrawn, and, you know, again, this has been to mixed reactions. Some people have legitimately said, you know what, I don't really know if I'm all that into this. Other people have been going, you know what, this is the Thrawn we've been waiting for. This is awesome. We love this. But I think a lot of us can agree that Thrawn's Empire does seem to be a little bit leaner and meaner than Palpatine. So what we're going to do tonight, with the help of all you guys, of course, is we're going to go into a little bit of this and dissect it and figure out how do I want to put this? Because it's somewhat of an unfair comparison in some ways, which of course we're going to get into. Again, I didn't think I was going to have to go on solo at first. So, you know, if it seems a little bit of shaky, hang on, you know, Daryl's coming, so it'll actually be back to our normal discussion show. But yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where I think that this would be a fun thing to do, right? Because Thrawn definitely has a little bit of a leaner, meaner empire, just because it's in a different period. You don't have a lot of the squabbling. Sure, you got some of the Imperial remnants or whatever, but once Thrawn actually fully takes over, I think we're going to see something that's a little bit closer to what we've seen in the expanded universe novels with Thrawn. But of course, time is going to tell that. Now, on the other end of this, we have Palpatine's Empire, right? So the original trilogy predominantly, because in the prequel trilogy, it was basically how he came to power. So, you know, we're just going to have to hold on and see how we could compare some of these. Because again, I could see where some people might say this is an unfair comparison. On the other hand, I think you're going to find that in some ways, I think Thrawn might actually have the deadlier empire, but we're going to talk about that. So right now we have David chatting in, and David basically says, "Hello, gentlemen. I never noticed a cool Mandalorian helmet in your background." Well, that's because when I do a full camera shot like this, you know, you actually do notice a little bit more of what I have in the background. Now, I actually thought about changing this up. I'm just going to digress for a second here. I thought about changing it up. I was actually going to buy a couple of more helmets, although they're not cheap. I mean, this is definitely not one of the, you know, like $1,000 ones that you see sometimes. But it is, still, I think it was still like $200 or $300 or something. But I wanted to buy some more. I wanted to buy, you know, not the obvious stuff like Vader or a Stormtrooper or something like that. I'll tell you what I would love to have, and this goes into our discussion tonight. I would like to have a Night Trooper helmet. That's what I would like to have, because I think that would just be pretty sweet. And of course, I got a bunch of, you know, different Funko Pops and stuff like that in the background. But, you know, I try to, and then there's this Darth Maul statue. You know, again, this is just sort of a holdover until Daryl and I could actually get back to being in the same room live again, which I know I've been threatening to do forever. But, you know, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. So, this whole Thrawn's Empire thing. I'm just going to go over some of the points, because, again, we got this from Screen Rant. Now, for those of you guys who know the ScreenRant.com site, you'll know they cover a lot of sci-fi stuff, but in particular, they cover a lot of Star Wars stuff. And I think it's important that, using that as a template that we sort of go over some of their points, because again, this is where we got it from. So I thought it would be a good idea to maybe go over some of their points and, just see what you guys think. So without further ado here, let me just take their first point. And again, I hope that Daryl can join us pretty soon. I think he was having a couple of technical issues or something. They seem to be... We're going to have to look at his technical stuff again, because there seems to be a lot of technical issues lately. So I apologize to that. It's just the way that things have to be right now. Unfortunately, like I said, we hope to get in a studio pretty soon. I want to welcome all the new subscribers. I want to thank all the Twitch people for joining us right now. I think that this could actually be a really cool discussion for all you guys to jump in on. So let me just go over this first thing. Basically, one of the things that this article was talking about was unlike Palpatine's Empire, Thrawn's tactics are a little bit more deliberate. They're a little bit more strategic. All of his moves are with purpose. And, his empire is basically dedicated to posing a threat to the New Republic and its defense fleet. Now, a lot of you guys might say, well, wait, hold on a second. Because that also sounds a lot like Palpatine's empire, right? I mean, look, Palpatine was a great statistician too. Or strategic genius, let's put it that way. All right, so now Daryl is with us. Hey, you there?
Hey.
All right, well, it sounds like it's your laptop mic. But
let me switch that for you.
Yeah, try to switch that. But all I did first was I was talking about the first point, which this article, the Screen Rant article that we're basing this on, is talking about Thrawn's empire being a little bit more strategic based and everything else, and not quite as capricious as Palpatine's empire. And I was basically saying that, you could easily say the same thing about Palpatine's in a way, but I think with Palpatine, he had this craving for power, and he had this more, I don't know, almost emotional connection being a Sith Lord, whereas Thrawn doesn't seem to have that. Thrawn seems to be very dispassionate about it, actually. He seems to be a little bit more purely strategic and logical in his thinking.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think with Thrawn, he's definitely more strategic. He's definitely more calculating in his movements. Palpatine seems to have it's more passion driven. It's more like, okay, I want to rule. It's all internal. It's about him. It's about him having dominance over people, and making people have to succumb to his. And everything is about him. He really wants to control it all.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's more of a, like I said, just this what solidifies me as the most powerful Sith Lord ever. That's basically where he's trying to cement himself. And it is very egotistical, because as we found out that, with Jakku, he felt like, okay, if the Empire couldn't protect them, then they don't deserve to live. And, it's just like,
exactly. It's just going to wipe them out.
Like, all right, out. Yeah, bring them out to one area, and then,
if I go, you go. That's basically what he's saying.
So exactly, because he doesn't want anyone to have his shine. And that's really where Palpatine has kind of really been always about. Thrawn, on the other hand, is I think he uses power as a tool.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It's more like, I want to accomplish or acquire as much as I can, and I use power in order to make that happen. But I think his I think it's one of his thing is one of like, I think I would just make the best ruler.
Well, I think what it comes down to, I think it comes down to, and going along your line of thinking, which I think is, pretty much dead on, is that Palpatine, it was more internal, right? He wanted to be the source of power. He wanted to continuously rule over everybody, and it was more about him. Where with Thrawn, it was more about an objective. He felt that the Empire was more fit to rule the galaxy than the New Republic. There were certain things about the, excuse me. Sorry, guys, my voice is still trash. I'm in like week 3 of whatever this sickness is, and I'm feeling better, but I still have a little bit of the cough and all that stuff, so... that's why I got some tea here, which, like I said, I think I'm actually going to stick with that because it's a really good drink for, for podcasting. But yeah, I just think that that's really more what it comes down to is that with Thrawn, it's more of an external thing. It's more, I think that the Empire under me is more fit to rule the galaxy than the New Republic. Now, of course, Ted Adam Green joins us and he says, look, Thrawn is formidable. He's a formidable opponent, and I hope we get to see him to his fullest potential very soon. And that's the other thing that I think I have to remind everybody about here is that Palpatine, always being a canonical character, cannot be underestimated in this discussion. Okay? Because you have to look at the fact that Palpatine's a little bit more fleshed out. We had the prequel trilogy to show his ascent to power and a little bit of, what his whole trip is, basically. And then, of course, we had the original trilogy that more or less shows somewhat toward the end of the zenith of his power and then his eventual downfall. And I guess you can even count the sequel trilogy now because he appears in that. And we find out that all of that has been by his design. So he's been more fleshed out. Now, Thrawn has been fleshed out, but in non-canonical sources for the most part. See, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky because he's firmly rooted in the expanded universe. But the problem is, you have a lot of that with which Lucas he liked the Thrawn character and he was okay with it, and he would maybe like certain parts of it. But for the most part, Lucas didn't even consider Thrawn canon at all, and then. Of course, after the whole Disney acquisition and everything, Filoni brings him in through Rebels, and we get to see him a little bit in that, but even that was more of a background context. And then, of course, the next time he appears, his name is mentioned in The Mandalorian Season 2, but we don't actually see him until like the last few episodes, really, of Ahsoka. So you have somebody who's not 100% fleshed out, and you're going from... the other thing you got to look at is you're going from a literary character to an animated character to now a live action character. And there's little nuances that are different from each one of those. Whereas Palpatine, even though he does appear in the books and animation and stuff like that, he was rooted in live action. Absolutely. And so I think that that's what you have to look at. So from that standpoint, I would say, okay, because again, we're framing this discussion on is ultimately what we're trying to, we're not going to probably settle this tonight, but really what's up for discussion here is who really has the deadliest version of the Empire? Because, and again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Screen Rant put this article, we're going to go through some of their points, because much like you guys, that's what makes our show different. We're not trying to be like this all-knowing news show. What it is we're like you guys. We read these articles, and we're discussing them with people. You guys. Whether you're watching us live and you want to chat in, or whether you're watching us on the rebroadcast of this, or the on-demand or whatever, you could put your thoughts in the comment section. Of course, you can go to our Discord and comment there. You can comment on our social media. So the point is, there's a lot of places that we could take this discussion. But the idea is, when you really look at it, and we're going to go through, again, Screen Rant's points, and figure out, well, who really does? Do we agree with it? Because I think their assertion, and again, you sent this article to me, so I read it, of course, but you probably may have read it, more carefully because you found it. I mean, was the assertion pretty much that they felt that Thrawn's empire was the deadliest one?
Yeah, and primarily because of the troopers, like the fact that you have these undead troopers, essentially. Um, that's kind of where, and the more as we already aforementioned, um, he's more calculating, he's more cerebral. He's willing to take this is the ideology behind the two characters between Thrawn and Palpatine. Thrawn is willing to take an acceptable loss. Like, okay, you know what? You won this one. I'll back off. If it means that, okay, it still doesn't interrupt my long-term plan, which I plan to enact. The thing with Palpatine is Palpatine doesn't want to take any losses because of the Sith thing, it's more about failure. And he has that working against him where he doesn't like to fail. He doesn't want, because to him it appears weak.
Well,
And
and
so
this is true. I mean,
that's the big change between the two of them.
Yes, and that's especially true in the original trilogy. See, I would argue that he was exactly like Thrawn in the prequels and maybe in like the Clone Wars and stuff like that, right? Because
the setup, yeah.
Yeah, because he couldn't just be like, haha, I'm a Sith Lord, But once he basically, well, I mean, he didn't really reveal that part, really. But, I mean, he did reveal his true intention. Look, now I'm the Emperor, and I'm kind of ruling everything. It's sort of, all bets are off. And so, yes, now he has a low tolerance of failure, which, by the way, literary Thrawn had a lot of those same qualities. He was, I misspoke as a statistician, but he was like a strategic genius in the sense of he understood losses that could maybe be viewed as acceptable in the grand scheme of whatever it was that he was trying to achieve, right? And just whatever objective lay before him at that point.
And Palpatine did too, to a certain extent. We saw a lot of that in the Clone Wars animation. Things would happen because, and of course, sometimes he would put the screws to his Padawans, but in the ultimate end, it's just like, okay, Palpatine kind of looked at it from the standpoint of whatever, because I'm still going to win because he's playing both sides of the equation. That's why he knew. See, Palpatine, when he's holding all the cards, it doesn't matter per se, because he's holding all the cards. He's on the Republic side, but then he's also manipulating the Separatist side of things, of the war.
Right.
And on either end, he's going to win, because as the Republic, okay, he ultimately, if the Republic fell, let's just say hypothetically the Republic fell during the Clone Wars. Well, he's already controlling the Separatists anyway, because he's got Dooku and Grievous. Like, those are his apprentices for all intents and purposes. So he's still winning. If the Republic wins, well, then he has no need for Grievous and Dooku now, because it's like, well, I got, ultimately my side won. So for him, it's kind of like I win even if I lose, type of situation. But Thrawn is a little bit more like, okay, he's that military like general that's like, okay, I'd rather lose the battle but win the war. That's his whole thing. It's
the other thing that it points out, right? I mean, there's some differences there too, because absolutely, Palpatine was doing a thing to where he basically he manufactured this war, and he was controlling both sides. So really, either side winning would achieve his objective.
Exactly.
So, I mean, there's that standpoint. Thrawn, on the other hand, like one of the things that the Screen Rant article points out, is basically a lot of the things like his Night Troopers, the Night Sisters, just some of the, I mean, they represent a little bit more of what he's more about, like, what's the Japanese style, where you have a broken vase and you fill in the cracks with gold. And basically it's,
It's like Kintsugi,
Kintsugi or
like
something like, yeah. So
yeah.
pretty much the idea is that you're taking something broken and you're rebuilding it, and you're putting gold in it, and now in a sense it becomes more valuable than it was when it was whole, right?
And it's something, it's new, it's familiar yet new, and you can change the worth and the value of it.
Right. So, you have to look at it from the standpoint of, okay, with these night troopers, particularly like Enoch, we've seen this, but what he's doing is he's taking something that was broken or defeated, like in the case of the Empire, and he's coming back, right, to make it even more dangerous and more formidable. And using that style is a little bit more. And look, we see that to a degree, although it wasn't gold, but we kind of saw that with Kylo Ren too.
Yeah, I was just about to say that when Kylo did his whole mask thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was one of those deals where I think that this is something that is now becoming somewhat of a theme or whatever. And I think that it's actually a brilliant one. And it's something that I think really resonates with people. And it's also something that in universe can resonate, I guess, because again, I mean, if you look at it from the Empire's standpoint, right, they've been totally defeated, humiliated. They're offered asylum and all that within the New Republic, which, I mean, from that standpoint, it was kind of cool. Like, listen, if you guys just chill out, don't try to fight us or whatever, you could be part of our society too. And, function and sort of make a good living. Although, there's a little bit of a halfway house kind of thing, where it's like, okay, well, we got to make sure you're not going to do stuff. And I thought that was kind of cool. But there's a lot of different elements in this that even just from this one point that I think are cool. Now, David says, losing made the GOAT believable. Losing helps him save face. Of course, he's talking about Palpatine, because we all know that David loves Palpatine.
Right.
But in a way, I guess if you're talking about losing, when we were talking about it didn't matter who won, right? Like if the Separatists won or whatever, you can't really count that because he was playing both sides. I mean, really, he wasn't losing. So there's that from that standpoint. But, and again, he's not really very good at losing, because like you pointed out earlier, he was basically like, look, if I'm killed, I'm going to take everybody, put him above Jakku, and have them all like rendezvous there. And he had some sort of a super weapon that he was going to detonate and wipe out the entire Empire, because his whole thing is like, look, if I die, then you guys aren't worthy to live, because you couldn't, it was basically like their final failure is what it was.
Yeah.
And Palpatine was basically going to punish them for their final failure. Now, for those of you who are wondering where we're getting all this stuff from, it's in the Aftermath trilogy of books, which again, this is where you're walking the line, and this is worth bringing up in this discussion too, because this is definitely something that you would have to read a lot of stuff. Like, for instance, at first Dom was basically saying, well, who is Thrawn? And then, of course, he was like, never mind, I just Googled it. See, that's the beautiful thing about Google now, right? Or if you, whatever Google, a lot of times they'll bring you to the Star Wars site or whatever, but if you just go to StarWars.com and their data bank and stuff. Oh, and another thing, this is a good time to, thank you, Dom, you actually opened things up for me to plug this. But every day we have these YouTube shorts that are released, every day at 7 a.m. And it's basically character profiles. So, you get a picture of the character's name, and then, like their strongest attribute, and then a brief description of them. And we've been releasing these things every single day. So every day you're going to get a different character, because a lot of times, we thought, okay, like Dom said, well, who's Thrawn? Okay, he ended up Googling it, but it's cool that we have these shorts that, especially once enough of them, get on there, you could literally just go to our channel and you'll see a little 1-minute video on who some of these guys are. Now, of course, Dom goes on to say, does not look threatening.
Looks can be deceiving, my young man.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, I could see. So I would agree that he looked less threatening in Ahsoka, like the live action version, maybe. I don't know. He looks pretty threatening to me here. This is more like what you see drawn in the novels. But like you said, looks are very, very deceiving in this case.
Yeah, I mean, like Yoda doesn't look powerful at all.
That's true.
She won't go.
Yeah,
you know.
That's that's a very good point, actually. Right, like Yoda doesn't look like anything. Judge me by your size, do you? So,
right.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the main issues, right? That it brings up is the fact that Thrawn doesn't really have this issue of. It's almost like he doesn't have any real skin in the game from a personal standpoint. I think that's a very important distinction. The other thing too is that what Screen Rant points out is that you have a little bit less of officers trying to, vie for more power or something, and they're in competition, because that's true. I mean, this did really hinder the Empire a little bit, because they were always trying to undermine each other.
Infighting.
Yeah, there's a lot of infighting. People were trying to sell each other out in order to get promotions and stuff like that, and win the Emperor's favor. A really good example of this that you could point to in the films is Tarkin versus Krennic. They were more or less sabotaging each other.
Yeah, or you can look as far as Deidre and that guy and Andor.
Oh yeah.
At the very beginning.
Yep.
It's just in the IFB or.
And that's because Palpatine encouraged that. He wanted everybody to do that because in Palpatine's mind, the best
of the best.
There's that, because that sort of spawns competition and maybe people being the best, but even more important than that. First of all, he kind of got off on that too. He liked to see that drama, but even more so, it basically kept them under his control, winning his favor, that kind of thing. And
feeding his ego,
and also making it so maybe they wouldn't necessarily get together and try to go up again. Now, of course, he could pretty much wipe pretty much any of them out, right? But still, you have to look at it from the standpoint of this infighting did hurt his empire a little bit. As we've seen in the films, we've seen this a little bit in the animated series that have come out. We see this all the time in the books. Actually, the novel Tarkin comes to mind. That was a phenomenal book. And, there's just all kinds of stuff like that. In Thrawn's empire, at least what we've seen so far, and this is true even to a degree in the novels, in the old Expanded Universe novels, you didn't really see a lot of that, right? Everybody was more or less united under Thrawn. Now, you might have people that had squabbles, disagreements. You had Imperial remnants that weren't part of Thrawn's empire proper. So in other words, they were still remnants of the old empire that did not reunite with the empire under Thrawn. But Thrawn took care of them, even in the expanded universe.
Yeah, the thing about Thrawn, and that's the thing, he's definitely more benevolent in a lot of ways to his people, because he kind of understands, like, all right,
that's another thing.
If I give them more, they'll do more for me. You know what I'm saying? And but I still keep my iron fist on things. Like I'm still strict, but I do give leniency to some people. But he still requires so much. I like Palian. Who else? What's her name?
There's like Arlana or Arielana. She was like a Chiss or something, but he was cool to her.
Yeah, but
There's
there's
well, there was
is it
like
Sloan?
Sloane. Yeah, she
Yeah.
was. So you also had to differentiate between the expanded universe books that Thrawn is in versus the new canon books that Thrawn is in. There are some differences. Now, Eli Vanto is another new canon. He was sort of like the new canon version of Paleon, except the fact that they actually mentioned Paleon's name. It was either in a book or it was in one of these shows that I remember where I'm like, oh, so Paleon's actually a thing. He's going to be appearing at some point in this new canon. Because in the books and everything, when Timothy Zahn rewrote them and made them seem a little like, okay, I'm going to put the new canon spin on Thrawn now. And he changed him a little bit, very subtly, but it is different. It seemed like Eli Vanto was the new Captain Paleon. And it was really interesting how there was a big parallel between those two characters. But now it looks like we're going to get Paleon in the new canon. So it's really going to be interesting. Are they going to bring Vanto in? It's going to be really interesting to see what they do with that whole storyline too. But you're right. I mean, he would reward his office. I mean, he just had a whole different vibe than like a Palpatine or Vader, He wasn't choking everybody out, basically, because, they looked at him wrong. I mean, those are things that, you have to look at. David chats in, he says, Palpatine's personality is that of the serpent, smoothly, deceivingly, and hiddenly manipulating the chess pieces. What is Thrawn's personality? Ahsoka cast Papa Smurf, so that doesn't count. Well, again, I mean, if you look at Thrawn, this is Thrawn more looking like he does in the novels. He's a Chiss. They have blue skin and red eyes, It's like, you got to judge him by the content of his character, as it were.
Oh,
and
you did not.
I did. I went there. Amen.
Oh.
Blue
Lives matter.
Well, Blue Lives Matter.
We're not talking about law enforcement.
Right, we're not talking exactly. It's like, wait a second.
Although they do matter, but
but in this case, we're talking about the Chiss. Chiss lives matter. And
yes.
And the thing is, well, go ahead. I know you want to answer this.
See, Thrawn. Okay, so to your question, David. Okay, so yes, you're absolutely correct in your assessment of Palpatine. He's a smooth serpent. That eventually, he's moving chess pieces. Thrawn is a piece of fiberglass. He seems unassuming. He seems non-threatening. But if he gets under your skin, it's like the worst itch you could possibly have. And it's tearing you up and you cannot get it out of you.
I think there's a lot of things you have to look at. I mean, if you're going to really go for Thrawn versus Palpatine personality wise, right? There's basically, yes, Palpatine is kind of smooth, but actually he got less so after a while. Whereas, you have
to be.
Well, I mean, you have to look at it from what their motivation is, right? Because Palpatine's motivation, as we've said earlier, was strictly power. He just wanted power over everyone and everything. He wanted absolute control. Thrawn has a lot of those same things. He's more of a strategic genius, though, than Palpatine even, because whereas Palpatine will use the Force a lot of times to see things, Thrawn doesn't have that. And there were a lot of times where Thrawn was a couple of steps ahead of Palpatine, too. Like, he knew what Palpatine was going to do. He uses art to study his enemies. He analyzes their weaknesses. He's kind of like a Sherlock Holmes type of person. You know what I mean? So, whereas...
if you want to come... And to that point, I think... Okay, so let me put it this... Since David wants to use snakes as metaphors, Palpatine is more of a rattlesnake. Like, everybody kind of knows, like, you don't fool with a rattlesnake. It's like, okay, and his venom is vicious. He has no problem. Like, he'll fricassee you with some force lightning and it's over with.
Mm-hmm.
But he kind of gives you that warning. Like, like that rattle is like, okay, don't think that just because you're looking at this old man that's all shriveled up, don't think that I can't do anything. Trust me. Thrawn is more like a python or a boa constrictor, where pythons and boa constrictors actually they kind of lay next to their prey sometimes.
Look, a
to
biology
judge
lesson.
Their size. I know.
It's like, all right.
They kind of judge their size, but the thing is like when they coil around you, it's slow and it's a slow, methodical, painful death, though.
Well, and every time, with a boa, every time you breathe out, it constricts.
It constricts, and that's how Thrawn is.
And that's how Thrawn is. Now,
wears you down.
No, absolutely. Now, Ted Adam Green takes a stab at this, too. He says, for me, the big difference between Palpatine and Thrawn are their end goal motivation, which is, like what we were saying. One is strictly egotistical emotions, and the other is just trying to run a very efficient galaxy. And so that actually makes a lot of sense, too, right? I mean, because, again, you have the goal of Palpatine, which is absolute power and control over everyone and everything. Thrawn doesn't really seem to have that, that personal of a goal. His is more like, look, we want it clean, we want it efficient. And again, I can't stress this enough. You have to really read the subtleties between the expanded universe version, the animated version, and now the live action version. Now, we could talk about the live action version, the cool things where Thrawn did. Look, I mean, during our Ahsoka review, we said, there was a lot of things that they retained. Overall, it was pretty good. Now, we did talk about some things that, some of Thrawn's decisions in Ahsoka seemed a little bit amateurish, and, it just wasn't Thrawn-like, right? Like, Thrawn wouldn't have done some of this stuff. He would have done things a little differently. The portrayal was good. It was just, again, the biggest issue with Ahsoka was the writing. There's a lot of writing problems with Ahsoka. And the writing Thrawn's character in that show was no exception. But again, it wasn't really anything to do with Lars Mikkelsen's performance. I would like to see Lars Mikkelsen maybe get in a little bit better shape for the Thrawn role, though. He's a little portly for Thrawn. Thrawn is a very athletic, because that's another thing, too, that's a big difference between Thrawn and Palpatine. Palpatine is all horsepower. He's one of the most powerful Force users in the history of the Jedi and the Sith. His power cannot be overstated. However, it's sort of like and David likes comics, it's sort of like the difference between Superman and Batman in a lot of respects. Because, much like Superman, Palpatine is pretty much all powerful, and it comes from this external, power source. Whereas Thrawn, much like Batman, he's extremely athletic. He's an excellent hand-to-hand combatant, and he's kind of a genius and like a detective. And really, this is the first time that I've really sat and thought about this, but there are a lot of parallels between Batman and Thrawn, honestly.
Yeah.
And there's even the certain ruthlessness that's very similar to that, too.
Oh, yeah.
So, I think that that's something that's worth pointing out as well. I think that that's pretty cool. Let me see. What else is this? This article's talking about, because I actually pulled it up. It's pretty much talking about that, Thrawn's empire is going to be dedicated to carefully channeling and focusing his attention. And of course, his attention is on the New Republic. Now, the New Republic can't be understated either. they become quite formidable. And that's been something that's been obvious in a lot of the shows. Now, this is something that I think is a very interesting parallel between the expanded universe of the New Republic, some of the new canon novels of the New Republic, and then, of course, what we have here. Now, at this time, the New Republic is powerful, but there's still a certain amount of fragility to it because it's new and they're trying to establish themselves, right? They're trying to establish that dominance.
Mm-hmm.
The Imperial remnant is scattered, and so Thrawn basically is just trying to change it into a leaner, meaner, stronger version.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think what the thing about and Leia kind of said this to Tarkin. She said, the more you tighten your grip, the more systems will slip through your fingers.
Yep.
And that's what Palpatine was all about. He was all about ruling with might. Everybody kept talking about, if you think about it, if you listen to the comments that are made from the Imperial officers, fear would keep them in line. Fear of this battle station, and it was just all about that, having that type of weapon, having that type of dominance. And you think about it, Palpatine was always trying to come up with some super weapon to kind of control, keep everybody in line. Whether it was a Death Star or the last Order, like super fleet that basically had Star Destroyers with Death Star type cannons on them. So basically, these Star Destroyers are carrying the same power that a Death Star would have. But now I can spread them across, which is really, honestly, like that's actually more terrifying. Really,
honestly,
had that actually happened, I would have been over for everybody, man.
Everybody, and that's the thing. I mean, I don't know if that just occurred to Palpatine, or maybe it's like, hey, we just had to wait till the technology caught up, or I mean, I don't know. Because
it was kind of like that Dr. Evil thing. Like, I want sharks with laser beams attached to them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, that's, of course, I couldn't unhear that in my head when they were talking about it in The Rise of Skywalker. I'm like, really? Now you're ripping off Austin Powers too? Oh boy. Well, I'll get into this in a second. Let me get David's comment. He says, so Thrawn is a poised genius who's the perfect military strategist. With him, you unknowingly wake up and say, oh, he killed me. What's he talking about?
I think he just feels like Thrawn isn't menacing enough. I think he wants to feel like Thrawn is like, oh, you just wake up one day and like, oh, he killed me. Versus, Palpatine is the kind of guy who's going to march in.
Well, but again, this goes back to something that I said at the beginning. And this sort of echoed Dom's comment in a way, too. And there's a similarity between the two of them. If you're not familiar with all of Thrawn's history, and look, again, the fault is firmly on the writers and showrunners and all that of these shows, because, I mean, look, when you have a franchise as old as this, a lot of times it just is what it is. You can't reintroduce this. It's comments like that. I mean, I'm not trying to take you down here, David, but it's comments like that where it's the reason why we have to see Batman's origin story in every single movie that's released for like 30 years, right? No matter how big or how... It's because you always have to catch up the casual fan. The problem right now that casual fans are having is that now Disney is starting to make Star Wars more for the hardcore fans. So if you're a hardcore fan, you already know about Thrawn. You already know everything he could do. You know everything that he's been. You know pretty much all that stuff, right? And so I can understand that, people who aren't necessarily familiar with Thrawn, maybe they didn't find him menacing enough. Maybe they didn't find him just because of the way he was portrayed in Ahsoka. So if Ahsoka was your first introduction to him, yeah, I mean, I can sort of understand it, although I don't know, and I'll be honest, it is hard for me to separate this because, I thought that it was pretty good. I thought he was menacing enough. I thought that it had a lot of the qualities, but then again, I've been living with Thrawn now for like 30 years. Whereas, I don't know, maybe it wasn't. Maybe if that was all I saw. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and I think that's what it is for them. Is because when you haven't really lived, see, we fell in love with Thrawn in the books, so that's
Yeah.
why we're so.
Yeah.
The problem is when you see him on screen, he doesn't come off like how you and I are portraying him.
Right. What we're doing is we're projecting. We're projecting the Thrawn that we know from the books, and even to a degree, to be honest, in Rebels. I mean, Rebels actually, I think, did a better job than Ahsoka in capturing him.
Well, I'm going to make a Batman analogy. This is one David probably would definitely understand. And this will probably be answered just to summarize David's thing.
Well, hold on though. Before you do that, he said this. You all said Thrawn was subtle. Was my rephrase incorrect?
No, he's not. He's subtle, but it's more like he's not going to give you this big bad guy.
Yeah, I'm trying to compare him to like another movie villain.
He's like Lex Luthor.
Well, but Lex Luthor had a lot of bravado too, though.
Yeah, but that's true. But
see, there's other movie villains that actually were so they were subtle, but they were really deadly. Those are the ones I'm trying to think of, because you got the big
like
bravado.
Hannibal
guys.
Lecter.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, that might be a little extreme, though. Okay,
and this is.
Well, I mean,
Go ahead.
I mean, okay, this may not be very good either, but it does. I mean, it kind of illustrates. Okay, look, I got to put a little disclaimer before this one. There's a lot of differences, but it's like the difference between Palpatine and Thrawn is very similar to the difference between Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers.
Mm-hmm.
You see where I'm going with that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Definitely. Jason is like brutish. He goes in there, he smashes. Michael's a little bit more methodical. Michael puts a little bit more thought into things. He traps people.
He's going to hunt you.
He's hunting you, exactly. Whereas Jason just goes in there and just, wreck shop, basically. And that's kind of the same difference because Palpatine doesn't have to make any pretenses. He has all this power. It's just kind of like, you're going to pretty much... Yeah, right. So he doesn't have to be all that subtle anymore. Now, he's also very strategically incredible and more of a genius. But at the same time, he could be a little bit more open about it. And Thrawn's a little bit more subtle in the sense of, like I said, he actually will study the art of cultures and stuff like that to learn about them. Yeah, or his opponents, exactly.
To find your weak areas to kind of exploit them. He's more like, I'm going to systematically break you down. So and I think the problem that David is having is, and this I'm going to compare how we see Thrawn is how David will probably look at Batman, the animated series version of Batman.
Mm-hmm.
What he's actually seeing, though, from Thrawn is Adam West's portrayal of Batman. That's why he's having the problem. It's because when you look at the Adam West version, I mean, comparatively speaking, it's like, okay, Adam West is not in shape at all. He doesn't, he's got the dad bod. And he just doesn't have that threatening, I am the knight vibe, because that's just not the way he's portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
Versus when you look at the Christian Bale, the Michael Keaton versions of Batman, those were more traditional. That's how most people want to see Batman.
Right.
And I think that's how he's looking at Thrawn, is he's looking at, you mean Adam West over here? But we're like, no, this is like Kevin Conroy, the animated series guy, but he's seen Adam West.
Well, and the other thing, I mean, look, we could get ridiculous with this. It's going to end up being a situation. Well, it's kind of like paper towel versus toilet paper. I mean, it's like, we could get really stupid with all of our comparisons here. But I mean,
we could.
It's just a different way of achieving the goals, and it's a different way. It's like a different. I don't know. It's kind of a weird. I mean, it's so funny that we're having a hard time with this.
Because Thrawn is and the reason being is because, and that's why Thrawn is so intriguing to a lot of people, is because he was written as a character that you've really never seen before.
Yeah.
You've seen traits of his character. You've seen some of his characteristics in other villains before, but him as a complete character, there's not really too many people you could compare to Thrawn because he's kind of his own creation. He's
a combination. Like I said, he's kind of a Sherlock Holmes meets. I mean, there's a lot of Batman in him too. I mean, David was like, Thrawn is Thanos, and then of course he goes on to say that animated versus Adam West analogy was perfect. I taught you well.
Taught me nothing.
Dragonfly Mass joins us. He says. Show Thrawn needs Salamiri. Yeah, that would actually be cool. David goes on to say, paper towel versus toilet paper. Mr. Vansel wins tonight. But it's one of those things that I think that, yes, the Salamiri were cool because they were like these little lizard, chameleon-looking creatures that basically created force bubbles. And so Thrawn would always have a few of those on him in order to shield himself from force users, basically. There's just like little things like that. There's a lot of things in the novelization version of Thrawn. Because remember, he was a literary guy first. He was born in the novels. And then Filoni brought him into Rebels. And I think he did a pretty good job of, making that a thing. Like, he pretty much honored what Thrawn was about and everything like that. I was pretty satisfied with the way he was in Rebels. Then there's the new canon version of Thrawn in the books, where it's kind of weird because he's almost the hero of the story in those books. Now, they were written by Timothy Zahn, just like, because he's a Timothy Zahn creation. And so Zahn is the one who knows, and I do wish... there's a lot of people that criticize Thrawn and everything in Ahsoka. I kind of wish that maybe moving forward, they would consult Zahn and have him come in and say, hey,
for that.
Either write the dialogue maybe, or even just consult. Like, even if he's not really doing the physical writing or anything like that, just go, I mean, Thrawn wouldn't necessarily do this or say that, or he might do this differently. Even from a consultation point of view, I think that it would benefit greatly if Timothy Zahn were involved in this. But, again, it's something that I don't necessarily think that, a lot of times I think people think that they have a handle on this character. But really, when you look at the subtle differences between the original expanded universe version, then the Rebels version, the new canon book version, and now the Ahsoka version, there's differences. And I could see why people maybe might have a hard time locking into this character, where, much like Don was saying, I was like, well, who is this guy? Because even if you Google him, it's like, well, which version are you getting? I mean, like I said, there's similarities there, but I don't know. I mean, now, how many of the books, because I know you've read some of the stuff, have you read any of the Thrawn-centric books at all?
By Thrawn-centric, if you mean like the Thrawn Ascendancy, all those, are you talking about those? Or are you talking about like Heir to the Empire?
Well, that's right. I know you read. I know you read those. You read Heir to the Empire and all that stuff. In fact, you read that entire trilogy, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, but there's... So Thrawn Ascendancy is just more like the latest Thrawn trilogy of books. There's also another one. There was one that came out before that.
Yeah, I do remember that one, but no, I didn't. I didn't read that one.
So yeah, but of course you saw Rebels.
So yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, so my Thrawn knowledge comes from the original Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, Last Command, and then, like I said, seeing him subsequently in Rebels.
Oh, well, here's something interesting. So, we have a new person chatting in. Siobhan Rao says Zahn was consulted for Ahsoka.
Really?
Yeah, no, that
especially at the beginning of the writing series, according to Dave Filoni and Wikipedia.
Unknown if he remained involved throughout the series. Well, first of all, welcome to the show.
Yeah, welcome. I think
this is the
thank
first
you for the information.
Thank you for the information. That's again, this is why we do this, right? Yep. It's a discussion.
Yep.
Yeah. So if he was consulted for this, then that makes it really fascinating to me. And again, I agree. It would be interesting to know if he was just consulted kind of in the very beginning, and then they just sort of did their own thing, or did he stick with it? We should try to find that out.
Yeah.
Because I would be very curious on it. Because again, I do think that, again, I kind of wish that Lars would, maybe do a few crunches or something and
hit the planet, good old Planet Fitness.
Yeah, hit Planet Fitness or something, and maybe just like look a little bit more like Thrawn physically. But I'm not gonna, because again, it should be stated that he is the same guy that voiced the character in Rebels, so he is the one that brought that to life, right?
I think if you did a body double, I think the best person would have been, Michael Fassbender.
Or Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would totally agree. Either one of those two would probably be the better choices. And physically, yeah, I think that they resemble him a little bit more. But again, overall, I didn't necessarily have a problem with, the actual portrayal of it. Again, I did think that there were a few decisions that the Ahsoka version of Thrawn made that I just don't think that the Thrawn we all know and love would have done. But again, we had to. Oh, this is classic. So David's response to that comment is, they must not have listened. Well, and again, it's tough to say because once again, when you're writing for a live action show, it is different than a novel. It is different. Look, if you even go to one of the holy grails of Jaws, because Jaws, the book was amazing, Jaws, the movie was amazing. And the portrayals of the characters were very similar to their book counterparts, but there were differences. And so, the Jaws franchise doesn't exactly have the same fan base, let's say, as Star Wars, where you're sitting there analyzing every little thing about it, right? But if you had somebody who was really hung up on the books, and they're out there for Jaws, I could see where they would criticize a little bit how maybe the movie versions were portrayed as brilliant as it was. And usually what ends up happening is people say, look, with the book version, movie version, there's going to be some differences because of the medium that you're dealing with. Just treat them as two separate things. There's no bigger example of that than the Meg series. Something that, of course, I was a very big fan of. The movies are nothing like the books. The movies are just basically like these fun little summer popcorn, stupid, look like they were produced from the Sci-Fi Channel, whereas the books were incredible. They were very serious in tone. It was, it was a whole different vibe. And so what you have to do in a case like that is just go, okay, look, there's the book universe and then there's the movie verse, right? So you have to split that difference. But in something like this, it's just a little bit, you got to be careful how you write this. David goes on to say, we need the Thrawn you have in your picture. Recast Grandpa and bring in the suave-looking Thrawn you have in your picture. And of course, David's referring to this. And that's it. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, maybe people could have overlooked some stuff if he maybe looked a little bit closer to the Thrawn that we've been living with for a while. I mean, how much do you think that makes a difference?
I mean, it definitely helps sell. Definitely. I mean, it sells you as okay, he's the big bad. He looks more threatening. I'll put it to you that way, which goes to Dom's point and David's point. But I mean, character wise, though, I mean, once again, and that's unfortunate that we haven't seen enough of Thrawn in Ahsoka to really truly make an assessment on him, because it's kind of like we get glimpses of him and his, like, we don't really know what his plan is, and so we're just kind of like, okay, well, Night Sisters, I need use of your magic. Cuts to Ahsoka and Sabine running around doing something for like 20 minutes, and then we see
that's true. He
dispatched 2 TIE fighters. So it's like we see him, but we're really not having a chance to really live with him, to really, so for people to somebody like
agree.
David and Dom, when they see him, they're like, okay, what's the big deal? But we're like, ooh, Thrawn. They're like, okay, why are you hooping and hollering over this guy?
Exactly.
Really not,
says like 4 words per episode or something like that. And I mean, look,
he's kind of almost like how Boba Fett was. Like, Boba Fett looked cool, but it's like until you read about him in the books.
That was almost an opposite problem. True, but that's an opposite thing, because Tamira Morrison, I mean, he got bigger muscularly, and he also gained a little weight, so he just looked a little bit more portly. Because there was a big thing about that too. Like, if he had looked at the way that he did when he played Jango Fett, I think people would have been more about it. But they're like, who's this guy?
Well, no, I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking
about. Boba Fett from the original trilogy.
I know. Okay, I get that. Right. But, well, that's true too.
That's what I'm saying. Like, in the original trilogy, like, he's no good to me. Like, he's walking up to Vader. I mean, he's, and then the Han's like Boba Fett, so.
Well, then we get that stupid slapstick death that we got in Return of the Jedi. That's like, dude, really? I mean, George, come on, man. I know it's for kids, but even as a kid, I was like 12 years old when that thing, and I had the same exact reaction in the theater. I'm like, seriously? This super powerful, menacing guy that we had seen, who's like the most feared bounty hunter in the galaxy, and it was like watching a Bad Three's Company episode. By the way, my, sincere condolences to the family of Suzanne Summers. That was a big loss. Speaking of Three's Company, that was, her passing yesterday. It was kind of a tragic thing. But again, I think a lot of it is valid when you say, look, we don't know yet. There's not enough screen time for Thrawn for us to jump to these conclusions. And, we have the whole, like, little hearts coming out of our eyes because we have this whole back catalog of Thrawn material that we're drawing from, and we see a little glimmer of that in Ahsoka and go, that's the Thrawn we know. And everybody else is like, what are you talking about? The guy said like 2 things. And by the way, that TIE fighter thing still didn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah, I faced the Jedi before. I will never underestimate them again. Yeah, send 2 TIE fighters. Acceptable losses. He wouldn't have even accepted. It's like a lot of people go, well, he can't afford to lose a lot of the fleet. Well, he couldn't afford to lose 2 TIE fighters either. It's like send 5 to do the job, or 2, and you're definitely going to lose 2. But again, I'm not going to revisit. I'm actually in a pretty, good, happy mood today. I'm not going to go there again. David says, whose army had the greatest victory? Does that make them the superior empire? So it's really 2 questions in one here, But again, that's a tough one. Because you have to understand something. Palpatine created the empire. That was his invention. Thrawn had a little bit more of an issue because he had to take a fragmented empire and reunite them. But it's really tough to say. And again, we have to go back to the books here because that's really, and really it has to be the expanded universe, because it was the Thrawn books that came out in New Canon are basically twofold. You have 2 Thrawn trilogies in the New Canon. One is just like, the titles escape me now. One's just called Thrawn. I forgot what the second and third one were called, but that basically is almost like a little prequel in a way, where it shows how Thrawn rose up through the Empire, like how he was discovered by the Empire and sort of captured, and then he makes a deal with Palpatine, and then he kind of rises through the ranks. So it's really more of the story on how he became a Grand Admiral in the Empire when he was actually a Chiss, and it's a known fact that Palpatine was a xenophobe. He hated aliens. Like, if they weren't humanoid, he was actually like kind of racist against them in a lot of ways. He hated them. So having a blue-skinned Chiss in the ranks was a little strange. So it kind of goes through that. The second book, the Thrawn Ascendancy that you were talking about, that's really more of an even further prequel. Well, kind of. It's actually like, it's in between episodes, like it falls somewhere between like episode 2 and episode 3. And probably overlaps episode 3. There is a cameo by Anakin, but basically, after the events of the original Thrawn trilogy in New Canon, he goes back to his homeworld. Eli Vanto, basically, like they had this little exchange program where Vanto goes to the Chiss and somebody else came into the Empire. Thrawn goes to basically deal with a bunch of threats, and the whole trilogy, I've only read the first book of that one, by the way, but from what I understand, the whole thing is about this whole like political thing between all these, like there's the Chiss and a couple other groups, and you know, you had all these different warring factions and stuff, and then you have the Grisk. That's where they're introduced. They're kind of like using Vong stand-ins. So it gets really interesting, actually. It's really cool, honestly. I got to get back to reading those, actually, because I'd like to read the other 2 books. But when you deal with that, really, the only way that you could compare, okay, whose army was the most, whose version of the Empire was the most victorious, you have to go back to the expanded universe and look at that, because that's where we deal with Thrawn in this time period. What they're doing is they're more like softly rebooting Thrawn in this post-Return of the Jedi time period. Now, in the new canon, we don't know yet. We've seen him in a couple of episodes of Ahsoka. We don't know what he's carrying in those, you know, those crates or cases or whatever. I mean, there's just a lot of things we don't know, right? Mm-hmm. So you had to go by the expanded universe, and it was kind of a tie. And then, of course, does that make them superior? I mean, what do you think? Do you think it makes them superior if they were more powerful?
No.
I don't either.
Because power doesn't necessarily mean you're superior. It just means you're strong, but like superior just means like, can you achieve the objective?
Exactly.
You know, it's like, okay, you know, it's so using a martial arts thing once again, because it's me.
It is you. That's what you do.
All right.
That's where we go.
All right. You can have someone who's stronger physically, but if I know how to manipulate you into a position where you lose, I win. It doesn't matter how. I mean, that's why you look at people like boxers. You know, look at someone like George Foreman. You know, you look at how big George Foreman. I mean, that's why I call him Big George. Like, he was huge. Mm-hmm. You know, and Muhammad Ali was, you know, small compared to him.
Right.
But Ali outboxed him because it's the sweet science of it. It's like understanding the ring, understanding how to cut people off, understanding, you know, the whole rope-a-dope thing that he came up with.
Well, it's
It's
also,
strategy.
I mean,
It's
look, you
strategy, and
can,
that's between Thrawn and, once again,
and if you want to
looking at
carry
between
that
Thrawn
on,
and Palpatine.
you could go Bruce
hmm
Lee versus, well, anybody,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah, pretty much
but
almost anybody. Yeah.
here's the other thing you got to look at where you're dealing with Thrawn versus Palpatine. You also have to look at the fact of you have Palpatine's empire was always destined to implode
hmm
because it was essentially ruled by the dark side of the Force. The dark side of the Force is just by its very nature, it's going to consume and eat up its users. And the way that Palpatine was running things, it just always seemed to be destined to implode. Whereas Thrawn had, I think, the chance for longevity. And I think that that's the difference too, right? Thrawn's playing the long game. I mean, you could say
hmm
that Palpatine was too in his mind. In his mind, he was definitely playing the long game. He's incredibly
hmm
patient when it came to formulating his plan and just letting it unfold. He had all kinds of contingencies. I mean, the guy was extremely patient as far as him coming into power. But in a lot of ways, Palpatine had this whole like, okay, I'm going to wait until um, I amass
Yeah.
all this power, and then I'm going
hmm
to then just try to continue it. So he wasn't even really worried about running the empire so much. He was busy trying to figure out how he was gonna clone, other people so he could put his essence into them or something. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a
hmm
whole. I'm worried about eternal life almost. I'm gonna try to keep jumping my Sith spirit into the next person, and he was just really insane about that. Whereas
Because he wanted to rule
Thrawn,
forever.
exactly, where Thrawn was
hmm
really trying to create a sustainable, strong empire that could maybe exist without him. And it's just like a different ruling style. And I mean, I guess you could sit there and debate which one ultimately will bring desired results for all involved. But I don't know. I would probably lean towards Thrawn on that angle. But you could I could see where somebody could make the argument for Palpatine. I'm not saying that
hmm
it's like a definitive thing necessarily. I mean, that's what makes this topic so interesting. Actually, is that you can really go look. I can see both sides here.
Yeah.
But, again, I think a lot of it, I'm really curious on what everybody's viewpoints are going to be on this because, obviously we got a good cross section of what everybody's thinking in the chats right now as we're doing this live. But I'm also curious as this episode lives on, what are people thinking that are going to put stuff in the comment section? I mean, there's actually comments of people. I know Ted Adam Green, he actually had asked a question in a comment. I haven't gotten to it yet. If you're still watching, Ted, I'm going to get to it. I'm probably going to get to it after the show, actually. So watch for my answer. I didn't have a chance to read the question. I just know a comment came up. So I do try to go through all the comments. I try to read them all. I answer them all. We continue these discussions in the comments section of the show, on Discord, social media. I mean, this isn't the end, really. Let me get this other one from David in, though, before we wrap up. He says, what was Thrawn's impetus to be ruler? The greatest of all time just wanted immortality to rule the world for power. Why did Thrawn want to rule?
Well, we just answered that. It's
Yeah.
more so because he feels like um he could make it more efficient. He felt like the empire was a good idea, but he just felt like, there's a lot of things that were done inefficiently. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I have a better way to do it. And I think and that's the thing. A lot of people, it's almost, you made the comparison earlier, David, to Thanos. And he's kind of like Thanos in a way, in the sense of ideology,
Mm-hmm.
where he feels like, okay, humanity is too stupid to realize what it needs to do. So I need to reset things. And that was the whole thing for the snap, or the glitch, as everybody was calling it. Like, we need to just almost hit the reset button and start anew and make it a fresh thing, and that's what Thrawn was more about.
Well, and I also think if you really wanted to boil it down to one word, I think the difference is sustainability. You know, Thrawn's version of it was just more sustainable than Palpatine's version. And I think that that's really where the differences lie. If you want to go to like ruling style, is that you just have to look at it from a standpoint of which version of the Empire is more sustainable for long term. And I think that, you know, at least it seems like that would be Thrawn. Chad, the boys. Hey, Chad, you done playing Apex for the night and, you know, decided to join us, or you got it on in the background, or, you know, what's going on? I'm just curious.
With a Star Wars version of Gus Johnson and Joe Klatt.
Yes. Now, Peter Griffin joins us. He says, do you think that you're setting up Enoch killing Thrawn like his number 2 did? Han and Leia should have a big presence in the story going forward as well. And then, of course, Chad's like, no, all done. Yeah, that's a good question, actually, about the whole Enoch thing. That was one of those things that I'm still not really sure where they're going with him.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. We don't have a whole lot of information on Thrawn just yet, so that's why it's kind of hard to, at least for live action Thrawn, you know.
Yeah, right. Because, I mean, if you think about it, like I said, the number 2 guy in the expanded universe was Paleon. And again, he was mentioned in somewhere in the new canon. I wish I could remember where. It was either a book or it was a comic, or, you know, maybe he was mentioned during one of the shows. I honestly don't remember. And then, of course, you had Eli Vanto, who was kind of like the new canon version of Paleon before Paleon was mentioned. So now you got this Enoch guy who's kind of like Thrawn's number 2 right now, at least during Exile. Now, I have a feeling what's going to happen is he's going to come back because he's at Peridia now. So now that he's in what we would call like the galaxy proper, right? Like he's in the galaxy that we all know and love. Maybe Paleon he'll reunite with him or Eli or, you know, whatever. And so I'm wondering, what is Enoch's role in all this? Because, like you said, we don't have enough information yet. We really need a season 2, and that was one of the things that was a little bit disappointing. I think that they should have maybe brought this whole Thrawn thing in a few episodes earlier, because that way maybe we could have gotten this a little bit more fleshed out, and we could have figured out, you know, you could still set up a season 2 and actually tell the main story. You know, Andor, look, we keep going back to Andor because that was a pretty well done show. Whether or not you enjoyed the show or not, that's a different story. The point is, they set up their season 2 pretty nicely, but they did it in such a way that even though there were some unanswered things in season 1, it wasn't sloppily done like this was. You know, it's almost like when you're trying to cram for a test the night before, you know, that's what this was. Like, well, let's get Thrawn in on the last few episodes, and I mean, I don't know. That's how it hit me anyway. I don't know how it hit you.
Yeah.
Same way,
I
probably.
felt the same way.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about it during our review, actually. So, I mean, I think that that's one of those things that you just have to really look at this and say, okay, what are they really trying to do with Thrawn in live action? Where are they going with some of these side characters like Enoch, like even the Night Sisters? Where are they, you know, I mean, Elsbeth is dead. Maybe they could resurrect her too, honestly. You know, we really don't know what's going to happen. So I think, honestly, it's just going to be, you know, I think Thrawn's empire was a little bit more sustainable. You could still maybe argue which one ultimately was more powerful. And I guess it really depends on just your perspective. Okay, let me see. David's got one more we got to get in. I think it's about Andor. Usually, anytime we mention Andor, but no, I think he's talking about Ahsoka, actually. Or, I don't know. He's saying sloppy, but the series didn't suck. Okay. So I think he's talking about Ahsoka. Because he hated Andor.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way he's talking about Andor. And yes, Ahsoka didn't really suck. It should have been a lot better than what it was. I think that's really, if we were to sum it up in like a sentence, and I think you would probably agree with that too, right?
No, I think it sucked. I think it did suck, but because of the potential that it had so many glaring issues that it wasn't a good show because of the writing issues and because of how they tried to make or not how they tried to make it, just what they did with the directing of the characters and the writing issues made it so it's like, okay. And then coupled with the fact that it's like, all right, you wait till the last two, I mean, basically almost like the last two episodes to bring Thrawn in. It's kind of like, okay. And then we still have all these major questions. It's just kind of like you said, it was sloppy. And that's what made it suck, you know. Unlike Andor, you know, Andor is a slow burn, but at least when it's good, it's really good. And I understand that there's a lot of setup, but then there's big payoffs though. Like the heist scene, like there was a slow build to that, but when the heist hit, it was magic.
Oh, it was way better written. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, the breakout, you know, from prison, magic. You know, the whole tension between Deidre and Cyril, magic.
Yeah,
you had that last battle when they were when Andor's mom basically passed and everybody started fighting. I mean, magic. You know, since so you had big magical moments in Andor. I can't say the same for Ahsoka. Even if you talking about the Anakin scene, great episode, was cool, but we don't even know why we were there. We even said that, like, what's the point?
Well, and that's the thing. I liken Ahsoka to Obi-Wan. Is you know, I mean, I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it, and there was a lot of problems with it, and it had a lot more potential than what it showed. You know, I think Ahsoka was better than the Book of Boba Fett.
Yes.
The Book of Boba Fett, I would say, more or less sucked. I'm not really ready to say Ahsoka sucked because I did find a lot of good in it. You know, there was a lot of really cool scenes, and I think that if you go back, see, the problem is when we watched it for these reviews, I mean, first of all, you know, we're trying to, you know, we're like trying to watch it for an actual review. That's number one. Number two, we had this expectation of what it should have been, right? So we're watching it biased towards that. And when we don't get it, there was a lot of points where I think we were actually angry about it. Like, really? This is what we're getting? You know? And that's why I would like to watch it again now with more tempered expectations and just take it for what it is and see what I think.
Well, the only reason why I honestly, I can excuse Ahsoka. It sucked, but I excused it because this is Filoni kind of doing his own thing.
Well, and he's learning.
And he's learning, and that's my point. Like,
he's learning.
So, and when you're learning, you suck. I mean, we all did, you know, whether it was you playing bass or me learning video production, you know.
Now, hold on, let's just slow down for a second.
You're not willing to,
you know.
Now let's. Hey.
I mean, you know, let's just kind of. I mean, let's just.
I'm not saying.
Let's just back that up a little. Let's see. Siobhan's got some comments. 1 out of 3 comments here. Considering that Rise of Skywalker exists, an awkward situation with the current timeline is that Palpatine is secretly recovering and building the final order on Exegol whilst Thrawn returns. See, that exactly. this is one of the things that we were talking about, actually. I think we hit on this on one of the reviews, honestly. And that is that when you actually did the whole Palpatine thing in The Rise of Skywalker, anything that's happening up till now, you know that Palpatine is secretly returning and building his final order. The problem, though, is we don't know when this is. Because remember, The Rise of Skywalker takes place like 30 years after all this. We don't know at what point he was able to... I mean, sure, obviously he had these clones standing by. You know, he had, at least presumably, the bodies that he could transfer them into. They talked about this a little bit with the Aftermath trilogy, honestly, where they brought that a little bit, because that was another expanded universe thing that Timothy Zahn brought in. But they tweaked it a little bit for the new canon, and they hinted towards it in the Aftermath trilogy, which is a trilogy of books. The thing is, and this is where it gets a little interesting, we don't know a lot of key things. We don't know when Palpatine decided to secretly re-engage and start to put his plan in motion. We don't know when he created Snoke. We don't, there's just like a lot of things. So yeah, absolutely. That's pretty problematic. Second and third comment. Will Thrawn and Palpatine meet? They did meet. Will the Night Sisters figure out that Palpatine is in hiding? Does any of this matter? Just kidding. So Thrawn and Palpatine have met while, of course, he was in the, before the trilogy. Because the whole assumption becomes, thanks to Rebels, we know that Thrawn was exiled before the events of the original trilogy. So because he was exiled before the events of the original trilogy, he obviously he wasn't there for, the fall of the Empire, none of that stuff, right? So Thrawn basically is there as a Grand Admiral right up until, pretty much not too long, actually, before A New Hope. Mm-hmm. But the question becomes, what are you saying? Will they meet now in this current timeline? Right? It's like, okay, we know that they met, back when he was discovered and he rises up to the Empire and on it goes. But will they meet again? Will they meet now? Thrawn's trying to rebuild the Empire, because we don't know. We know with Kylo and Snoke, Palpatine was behind the scenes and influencing them and all that stuff, creating his final order. We don't know if that was happening at this point yet. So that's something that's very important to distinguish. Third of three comments. The New Republic storyline in Ahsoka was clearly being shown to be incompetent. To connect back to the rise of the First Order, Snoke, Kylo, and the Starkiller base. Yeah. We know that because Leia was so despondent that, she mentioned that they basically created the Resistance, which is like the new rebellion, because the New Republic was just getting a little bit too corrupt. They were getting a little bit too incompetent. And absolutely, it does appear like they're setting this up. So that's actually a really, really good point, honestly. And then, of course, David, he's got some. Mr. Vansel, you just said Ahsoka was sloppy, so I responded sloppy, but it didn't suck. See? Thank you, Daryl. We're brothers again. Thank you for saying it sucked. I taught you well. He's really obsessed with this whole teaching you well.
We have delusions of grandeur.
Yeah. So Ted Adam Green comes back and he says, for me, I watched with no expectations and took what they gave me and loved it. My 30-year-old niece had not watched the cartoons, but did see all the live-action Star Wars, and she loved it too. That's actually a really interesting thing to me, because usually the people that haven't seen any of the other material are the ones that are having the biggest problems, because, as we pointed out, you kind of have to if you really want to understand it. I mean, sure, you can watch these things and you can understand it maybe within the context of the show, but being that Ahsoka was essentially Rebels Season 5, you need to at least see Rebels. at least. But it's great that, everybody enjoyed it. I mean, look, and everybody's going to land in a different spot on this. There's a lot of people that absolutely adored Ahsoka. Then there's people that are kind of in the middle. Like, I would refer to John Campea. And John Campea, if you guys have ever watched any of his shows, he's notoriously, if he loves something, then he loves it. If he hates it, he hates it. I'll tell you why. He didn't actually like Ahsoka, but he didn't think it really totally sucked. He actually thinks that episode 4 is one of the best episodes of any Star Wars show at all. So, and I can understand why. I fall somewhere in the middle. Like I said, I would say that I enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it was good. There's a difference. And I would say the same thing about Obi-Wan. I didn't think Obi-Wan was particularly good. There were moments. There were things that were good about it. There were good scenes. There were cool concepts. There were things. But I mean, if you're just looking at it overall as a show, I wouldn't say it was good, but I did enjoy it. Same thing with Ahsoka. It wasn't good, but I did enjoy it. Whereas, the Book of Boba Fett, now that one, I like some elements of it. I thought some things were cool about it. I was just, because if I remember correctly, wasn't that another one kind of like Ahsoka where they just botched the season finale? Like it was getting so good, and then the season finale comes and you're like, really?
Well, the best part of Boba Fett didn't have him in it. It was when we got the Mandalorian 2.5 in it.
2.5, yeah, that was it. Yeah. That was hilarious. Well, and then, of course, Cad Bane. It was great to see a live-action Cad Bane. But again, it's called Boba Fett. And you brought this up with the Ahsoka series, too. When we did when was that? Was that Friday's show? Yeah, because it was a pre-recorded thing. So Friday's show, we did like this whole Ahsoka series recap, right? So we reviewed each of the individual episodes, and then we did like a recap of the entire season. Here were some good points, bad points. Basically reviewed the show, right? And that was one of the things that we brought up, was it was a very lackluster season finale. But the other thing that we brought up that you brought up first was the fact that the show is called Ahsoka, and it's not really focused on her. It really should have been called Sabine. You had Balin, who was, Balin Skull was a great character. I really hope they recast him. It's unfortunate, too, that Ray Stevenson can't, be alive to get all the accolades and all the things. I mean, it's just, phenomenal performance. There were some great performances in the show. It just wasn't what it could have been. And I think, again, this is where I think some people are landing differently with Ahsoka, right? There's people who maybe didn't have any expectations, like, Ted was talking about. He was just kind of like, look, I'm just taking what they give me. I'm just sitting back, getting a bowl of popcorn or whatever. I'm just going to watch the show and enjoy it. And I think that is the way that you can. Because the problem is when you start coming with expectations, when you start coming with too much of the prior canon in your head, it's easier to be let down. Now, of course, there's a lot of objective things we talked about too. The writing, the fact that Filoni is not an experienced live-action director. He obviously needs practice. A lot of people have brought that up. It's a big problem with the show, actually. I honestly think that if I had to point to one thing that killed the potential of this show, that would be the one. Because I think that would affect the writing somewhat, too. But, again, if you're one of the fans out there that really loved and really enjoyed Ahsoka, more power to you. And in fact, we're glad that people like that are coming in. Because, we don't want everybody coming into the discussion with the same opinions. That would be pretty boring. I mean, even for once, you and I actually, not totally, but like slightly disagree on the quality of Ahsoka. Usually it's pretty hilarious because the show's called Head to Head, and yet we usually... I mean, even some people in the audience point that out. Like, it's called Head to Head, but you guys agree most of the time. But, it's really about the two-generation thing.
Yeah.
2 fans, 2 generations, all things Star Wars. The reason why that's our tagline. But yeah, so I mean, overall, I think that, when you, just to wrap this thing up, when you bring up the Thrawn versus Palpatine thing, I think that also is colored by, are you a bigger Palpatine fan or are you a bigger Thrawn fan? Because you can find elements of both versions of the Empire to latch onto, and that's going to color your thing. I mean, we try to look at things more objectively than subjectively, but we're both big Thrawn fans too, so maybe that's inadvertently, coloring things. But the question, of course, again, it's not always about what we think, it's about what you guys think. So you know by now what everybody who has chatted with this live thinks. But the question is, anybody that's now watching after this show has gone live and you're watching the replay of it, what do you think? Leave your comments in the comment section. By the way, David said it's a great tagline. Thank you, sir. Let us know what you're thinking. If you guys want to carry this whole thing on Discord, link in the description. Join our Discord. Become a part of the community. That's really what we're trying to make the central hub of this community, so that way we could talk voice chats, text chats, all kinds of stuff. When we're not live on Monday and Friday, then we can continue the discussion there and maybe get into more stuff and recommend stuff to each other. I mean, it's a really cool little experience. And of course, we do have a Facebook and Instagram at head-to-head-SW, also Twitter, which is now X, which, it's kind of funny because you don't really say I tweeted something, you say I X something. I mean, still not really sure where they're going with that, but either way, X, which was formerly Twitter, we're there at head-to-head-SW. Be sure to hit us up there and, join us Friday. So again, Friday, 11 o'clock, that's when we're live for a while. So, that's going to be a really fun one for me because I got to get up so early the next morning, but I'm still going to do it. I'm going to be there for you guys. Do we know? We haven't really discussed what we're going to talk about, did we?
Nope, not yet.
Nope, not yet. All right, so just keep watching the channel. You'll see the event pop up. Join us 11 o'clock Eastern Time, live. And, we'll talk some more Star Wars. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at head-to-head-SW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at head-to-head-swpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.